look at your hands for a second.
Okay.
Like, if you are listening to this, maybe those hands have built something. Maybe they are used to turning a wrench or writing complex code or carrying a child.
Right.
But now, look at the screen you are probably holding right now. What if that screen is not just a convenient tool, but a highly calibrated weapon pointed right at you, mathematically designed to render you, well, completely obsolete?
I mean, it is a genuinely unsettling image, and honestly, it perfectly sets the stage for the architecture of what we are unpacking today.
It really does. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you're here with us. Our mission today is to explore a highly provocative, intense, and frankly, wildly detailed new ebook.
Yes, very detailed.
It is called Dead Man Clicking Big Tech's Push Order on Male Workers, and it is by Conrad Riker. We are going to explore his central thesis regarding the history of our modern institutions, the rapidly shifting economic landscape, and some pretty explosive claims about big tech and modern culture. And real quick, just to support this show, please remember to like and subscribe so you never miss a deep dive. Also, if you want to dig into this incredibly dense source material for yourself, head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books to buy the book directly. You are going to want to read this one.
Definitely. But before we dissect the mechanics of this book, I need to establish some firm ground rules for today's deep dive.
Yeah, that is probably a good idea.
Because this source material contains highly politically charged content regarding feminism, Marxism, and the men's rights movement. So I want to make it explicitly clear to you, the listener, that neither of us is taking a side here.
Right. Zero sides taken.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints or the politics or the conclusions of the author. Our job is simply to act as your guides. We are just here to impartially convey, unpack, and critically analyze the arguments and the massive volume of data contained in the original text.
Absolutely. We are just the messengers mapping out this territory. And the territory is, well, it is intense.
That is an understatement.
The core premise here is that the modern gig economy and progressive cultural shifts are not random accidents. Like, they aren't just natural market evolutions. The author views them as a coordinated techno-feudal system intentionally designed to erase the independent working man.
Right.
So where does a claim like that even begin?
Well, to understand the cultural arguments, you really have to start with the economic foundation. The book introduces this concept called the silicon slaughter, and the author forcefully rejects what economists usually call the Luddite fallacy.
Oh, let me jump in there really quick, because the Luddite fallacy is basically this comforting economic idea that says, don't worry about new technology destroying jobs, because history shows it always creates new, better jobs to replace them.
Yes, exactly.
Like the tractor put people out of work on the farm, but it created factory jobs, that whole thing.
Right, that is the traditional view. But the argument here is that past technological revolutions like the Industrial Revolution created new, physically demanding or highly specialized jobs that pushed civilization forward. Algorithmic AI, however, is fundamentally different. The text argues these algorithms are explicitly designed to target and eliminate the very cognitive and physical tasks that men naturally dominate.
Wow.
It frames this as a deliberate kill order on the working man's ability to provide.
And what makes this so compelling is that the book doesn't just, float this as some high-level economic theory. It grounds it in personal devastation.
It really does.
Like, take the story of Tony Marchetti from Memphis. Tony was a warehouse supervisor. He was making $68,000 a year. He had full benefits, and he was providing for his family.
A solid middle-class life.
Exactly. Then his human supervision role was entirely eliminated and replaced by an algorithmic management system.
And the aftermath for Tony is what the author points to as the intended feature of the system, not a bug.
Wait, a feature?
Yes. Because Tony now frantically drives for 3 separate gig apps simultaneously just to survive, while his family relies on government food stamps. He went from a respected independent provider to someone tethered to a digital leash.
Oh, wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure.
We have seen middle management get squeezed by efficiency software for decades. I mean, isn't this just ruthless corporate cost cutting? How does the author prove this is targeted at a specific demographic?
By showing how this algorithmic targeting moves up the chain to independent business owners. It is not just about replacing warehouse managers. The book cites the case of Robert Chen.
Oh, right, the bookstore owner.
Yes, a third-generation bookseller in Portland. His family built a physical business that thrived for 47 years. It was a monument to local stewardship. Then, Algorithmic pricing engines arrived.
Okay, let's unpack this, because how does an algorithm actually destroy a physical bookstore? I feel like we often throw the word algorithm around like magic, but what is the actual mechanism here?
It is a predatory feedback loop.
Mm.
Amazon doesn't just lower prices manually. They deploy algorithmic bots that constantly scrape local and online prices, and then they match or beat them by mere pennies dynamically.
Just constantly undercutting.
Exactly. And the algorithm is programmed to operate at a deliberate financial loss on specific items just long enough to starve the local competitor out of cash flow.
That is brutal.
Once Robert Chen's margins were systematically undercut by 34%, he couldn't pay his lease. He was forced to close. But the real serfdom comes next.
Right, this is the craziest part.
To keep any income flowing, Robert was forced to become an Amazon marketplace seller, paying a 15% referral fee to the exact same algorithmic empire that destroyed his family legacy.
He literally has to pay tribute to the company that conquered him. That paints just a brutal picture of economic displacement.
It really does.
But going back to the core premise, how does this purely economic shift connect to the broader cultural narratives we see today about masculinity? Like, losing a bookstore is terrible, but it doesn't automatically equate to a culture war.
Well, the author bridges that gap by arguing you cannot economically displace an entire demographic of historically strong, independent providers without simultaneously running a psychological pacification program.
A pacification program. Okay.
Right. Because if a population of men realized their economic baseline was being systematically dismantled, the natural biological response would be revolt.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, the culture had to invent a mechanism to keep them compliant. And this leads directly to the book's critique of modern therapy and the concept of toxic masculinity.
Here is where it gets really interesting to me. The book calls toxic masculinity a misandrist double bind.
Right. And for anyone unfamiliar, a double bind is a psychological trap where no matter what choice you make, you lose.
Yeah.
It works like this. If a man today displays traditional masculine competence, like if he is stoic, competitive, and aggressively protects his interests, society diagnoses him as toxic and a relic of patriarchal oppression.
But on the flip side, if he shows weakness, or if he fails to provide in this brutal new gig economy we just talked about, those exact same critics despise him as a pathetic failure.
Exactly.
He is either a dangerous monster or a useless loser. There is just no winning move.
And this isn't framed as just, internet chatter. The book argues it has been fully institutionalized. It heavily critiques the American Psychological Association's 2019 guidelines for psychological practice with boys and men.
Oh yeah, those guidelines made a lot of waves.
They did. Because the author claims these guidelines officially pathologized traditional male traits like stoicism and self-reliance, framing them as psychological defects that literally need to be cured by professionals.
Which leads to a concept the book calls the vulnerability trap. We hear this everywhere, right? Men need to open up, men need to go to therapy, men need to be vulnerable.
Constantly.
But look at the financial data presented in the book. The therapy industry reportedly generates an average of $14,200 per male patient by pathologizing their natural stoicism.
It is a massive industry.
It is like a digital roach motel for the male psyche. Society invites you in, says, hey, it is safe here, open up. But once you drop that traditional masculine shield, your independence is stripped away, making you a compliant, emotionally fragile consumer.
And the human cost cited here is just staggering. The book pulls data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, claiming that men who process their emotional problems with mental health professionals actually suffered a 23% higher suicide completion rate than men who rely on structured physical activity and rugged peer support networks.
Hold on, I have to push back on that statistic for a second.
Go ahead.
If men in therapy have a higher suicide rate, isn't it highly likely that men who are already severely depressed or suicidal are simply the ones seeking therapy in the first place? That sounds like a classic confusion of correlation and causation.
That is a critical question to ask, and the author actually attempts to address it.
Okay, how so?
He argues that even when controlling for baseline depression, the actual methodology of modern therapy, which often relies on endless emotional introspection and dwelling on trauma, is inherently counterproductive to male psychology.
Oh, interesting.
The book argues men heal through forward momentum, action-oriented problem solving, and shoulder-to-shoulder camaraderie, not face-to-face emotional excavation.
Okay, I see the logic he is applying there. So if this double bind is real and this psychological trap exists, the obvious question is, who built it?
Right.
The book doesn't just blame some vague cultural evolution, it points to the deliberate capture of key institutions, specifically education and the media.
It follows the money. The author claims that big tech monopolies have funneled over $300 million into university gender studies departments since 2015.
$300 million. I mean, that is massive.
It is presented as a highly strategic investment. By funding these departments, big tech is essentially purchasing an intellectual class to manufacture pseudo-academic cover for their corporate policies.
Oh, I get it.
It gives them the vocabulary to justify replacing expensive male employees with cheaper labor under the guise of diversity and equity.
And he calls the result the education gulag, which is quite the term.
Very provocative.
He traces this systemic shift back to specific milestones, like the 2008 findings from the Wellesley Centers for Women. The argument is that this was the moment education deliberately replaced competitive merit-based learning, which boys naturally thrive in, with collaborative, socially focused projects.
And the result of that shift.
Yeah, as of 2024, the American higher education system is 59.5% female and 40.5% male.
And the author points out that if those numbers were reversed, if men were nearly 60% of college students, the federal government would declare a national emergency.
Right.
Instead, it is celebrated. And he argues this institutional hostility is legally enforced through Title IX.
Right. He mentions the 2011 Dear Colleague letter weaponizing Title IX. But for the listener who isn't a legal scholar, what does that actually mean in practice? Like, how does a letter change the system?
Well, it fundamentally altered the burden of proof on college campuses. Traditionally, in the justice system, you need proof beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning you're essentially 99% sure of guilt to convict someone.
Sure, standard due process.
But the Dear Colleague letter mandated that universities use a preponderance of evidence standard for sexual misconduct hearings.
Which means what, exactly?
It means 50.1%, a mere coin flip.
Wow.
If a campus tribunal decides it is just slightly more likely than not that an accusation is true, a young man can be expelled, his reputation destroyed, and his future erased. The book frames these as literal kangaroo courts that strip young men of their basic due process rights.
And if a man manages to survive that education system and enter the workforce, the book argues he faces the parasitic colonization model, which is fascinating because it explains the destruction of historically male-dominated spaces, like the video game industry.
The mechanics of this model are very specific. Progressive ideologues infiltrate a thriving, historically male-built industry.
Okay.
They extract the capital from that industry to fund diversity and inclusion initiatives, which alienates the core audience and ruins the actual product. When the company inevitably struggles, the ideologues move on to the next host.
He points directly to the massive 2023 gaming industry layoffs, 10,500 workers fired at places like Electronic Arts and Activision Blizzard. But again, how does the author link corporate layoffs specifically to ideology? Aren't layoffs just bad business cycles?
The book links it directly to ESG scores, environmental, social, and governance ratings.
Oh, ESG, right.
But these scores are heavily monitored by massive institutional investors. If a gaming company misses its diversity quotas, its ESG score drops. When the score drops, the institutional money pulls out and the stock tanks.
So they are held hostage.
Exactly. So according to the author, corporate boards fire thousands of the actual game developers, who are mostly men, to protect the budgets of the diversity officers and maintain their ESG rating. They prioritize demographic quotas over making a product their core male audience actually wants to play.
So the mechanism of capture is entirely financial. And why doesn't the public hear the truth about this?
Well, the media.
Right, because using Pew Research data, the book notes that 92% of journalists donate to Democratic candidates. They aren't reporting the news, they are enforcing a monoculture. Furthermore, research shows female suffering receives 6.3 times more media attention per capita than male suffering.
Which perfectly insulates the system. The media apparatus is structurally designed to ignore male anguish while amplifying the narratives of the very institutions causing it.
We have covered the economic displacement, the psychological traps, and the institutional capture. But the final diagnostic chapters go to an entirely different level. The author argues this control over men is ultimately enforced through biological tampering and strict algorithmic censorship.
Yes, this is the testosterone deficit argument. The book claims the modern physical environment is literally chemically castrating men, making them biologically primed to be submissive.
The story of James Morrison from Detroit really drives this home. James, a factory worker, was diagnosed with clinical hypogonadism, a severe failure of the testes to produce testosterone at age 32.
Just incredibly young for that.
Right. And he later discovered his employer had buried internal studies documenting the severe endocrine disrupting effects of the industrial chemicals he worked with daily. The book views this not just as negligent pollution, but as a system that benefits from a pacified, low testosterone male population that lacks the biological drive to organize and fight back.
And this requires a total reframing of how society views testosterone.
Yeah.
The prevailing narrative is that testosterone is a toxic hormone that causes primitive aggression.
Yeah, you hear that constantly.
But the book counters this by citing a landmark 2009 study published in the journal Nature by researcher Christoph Eisneger.
Let's break that study down. What did Eisenegger actually prove?
The study proved that testosterone actually promotes fairness, strategic cooperation, and status seeking through legitimate achievement.
Wait, really? Fairness?
Yes. When administered in a controlled setting, healthy testosterone levels didn't make subjects want to flip tables or burn down society. It drove them to build alliances, protect their group, and aggressively enforce fair rules.
That completely flips the script.
By framing male biology as an inherent threat, the author argues the progressive establishment is trying to dismantle the very biological engine of human progress and fairness.
And if your biology isn't suppressed enough, big tech uses the algorithm to finish the job. The book calls it follower hostage syndrome. You build an audience, you build a business, but the tech platform completely controls your distribution.
The 2019 YouTube demonetization wave is the prime example here. The algorithm was supposedly tweaked for corporate safety. But look at the aggregate revenue data provided.
Yeah, this data was wild.
During that wave, male creators in fitness, gaming, and political commentary lost a devastating 68% of their revenue. Meanwhile, female creators in beauty and lifestyle saw only a 12% dip.
It is an ideological slaughter. But how is this legal? Like, how can monopolies just financially unperson half the population?
Because of the massive legal hypocrisy known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act.
Can you explain how Section 230 actually works in this context?
Imagine a phone company. If you use a phone line to plan a crime, you can't sue the phone company because they are just a neutral utility providing the wire. That is a platform.
Right, they were just the conduit.
But if the New York Times prints a defamatory article, you can sue them because they are a publisher who actively curates and edits their content. Section 230 gives big tech companies the legal immunity of the neutral phone company, while allowing them to act with the aggressive censorship and curation power of the New York Times.
That is quite the loophole.
They get all the protection and zero liability. The book argues they use this exact loophole to crush any male creator who promotes unapologetic masculinity.
So what does this all mean? We have laid out a massive interconnected theory. If the game is rigged economically by AI, psychologically by the therapy trap, culturally by ESG scores, biologically by chemicals, and digitally by Section 230, what is the actionable solution for the listener? Does the author just want men to sit around and be angry?
Not at all. The final chapter is a blueprint called The Reclamation. The core solution is deliberate, strategic withdrawal, and the building of a parallel system. It is a 10-step plan, and the foundational steps are highly practical.
Let's go through the major ones.
First, men must learn a physical trade. You have to secure your economic baseline with skills in the physical world that cannot be outsourced or instantly replaced by an algorithmic pricing engine.
Makes total sense.
Second, you must demand the total elimination of corporate media consumption from your life to stop the psychological warfare.
You literally have to cut the cord. Stop giving your attention and money to screens that hate you.
Precisely. Third, men must build in-person local male networks entirely away from algorithmic surveillance. You have to look other men in the eye, trade physical skills, and build community in the real world.
Get off the internet, basically.
Yes. And finally, men must aggressively, unapologetically reject the concept of toxic masculinity. Refuse to apologize for your natural biological drive to build, provide, and protect.
It is a blueprint for absolute sovereignty, but it really forces you to take a hard look at how you live your day-to-day life.
Which leads to a really profound, lingering question for you to ponder. If you take this thesis seriously and look at the extent of this control, if the modern world is increasingly driven by digital convenience, network effects, and highly curated algorithms, is it actually possible to achieve true independence while remaining a part of modern society?
That is a tough one.
Or does genuine freedom now require a total radical disconnection from the modern grid?
That is a heavy thought to sit with. Can you be truly free while carrying a glowing algorithmic weapon in your pocket? We started this deep dive looking at the calloused hands that built the world and the screens that are trying to decommission them. The question is, which one are you going to rely on moving forward?
Exactly.
We want to thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into dead man clicking. Please remember to like and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these rigorous explorations.
And if this conversation sparked something in you, you need to check out Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy the book and read it for yourself.
Yes, definitely. And if the ideas resonated, the author asks that you leave a 5-star review to help beat those algorithms we just spent the last 20 minutes talking about. Finally, make sure you follow the author for more content, subscribe to @ConradLiker on Substack, and find him on Twitter and YouTube. Until next time, keep digging deeper.